The Tiananmen Square protests of 1989 were student-led protests in Beijing, which took place in the spring of 1989 and received broad support from city residents. The protests began with a march by students in memory of former party leader Hu Yaobang, who had died a week before. Throughout the 1980s, Hu pursued a series of economic and political reforms. Hu's political and economic reforms made him the enemy of several powerful party elders who opposed free market reforms and attempts to make China's government more transparent. Originally, the protests had only around 50,000 students, but as the days passed, around 1 million more people joined in, angered by widespread corruption in their government. These people included women and children, old men, and everyone in between. The people were not calling for revolution, they were calling for a few reforms in their government system. The Western media at this time was greatly focused on the Soviet Union and the trouble that they were having with communism. Everyone had a feeling that the communists in Russia would not be able to sustain themselves for much longer. When the people heard about the protests in Tiananmen Square, the media took this to be another sign that communism would not be able to last much longer worldwide. The Chinese government also knew that communism was failing in Russia and vowed that they would not let their system fail, even if they had to use force. On May 20th, the Chinese government declared martial law and sent convoys of soldiers to break up the protests. On June 4th, 1989, the military opened fire on the civilians, firing without restraint at anyone who got too close. The soldiers killed women, children, and anyone else who was unlucky enough to cross them. The soldiers sprayed bullets at nearby apartments, sometimes killing people who were not even involved with the protests. The death toll is estimated to be anywhere between 400 and 1,600 people, and hundreds more were estimated to be wounded. The people had set up barricades at every intersection coming into the area of the city where the square was located. The military had to push its way through barricade after barricade to get through the square. For protesters who set up these barricades, it quickly became a race to keep far enough ahead of the government troops to be out of danger. On June 5th, suppression of the protests was immortalized in Western media by the famous video footage and photographs of a lone man standing in front of a column of tanks driving out of Tiananmen Square. The iconic photo that would eventually make its way around the world was taken on the 5th of June on Chang'an Avenue. The Tank Man was to become the icon of these protests against the Chinese government. He was lucky. Others who got in the way of tanks were sometimes run over. To this day, no one knows what has since happened to him. After the protests had been subdued, the authorities carried out mass arrests and executions of regular citizens who were involved. In contrast, the students, many of whom came from higher class backgrounds and were well connected, received much lighter sentences. Since these protests, China has placed censorship on this incident, forbidding discussion of the Tiananmen Square protests. Deng Xiaoping, in his speech given 5 days later, denied that anyone had died in the square, saying, "We shall see. What kind of people are the PLA soldiers? Was Tiananmen Square washed in blood? Who had shed blood? Once we clarify this question, we will have the initiative." While visiting the United States in 1996, Qi Huaishan, the general who oversaw the martial operations, insisted that no one died in the square. Chinese textbooks have little, if any, information related to these protests. Following Tiananmen Square, officials banned controversial films and books, and shut down a large number of newspapers. Within a year, 12% of all newspapers, 8% of publishing companies, 13% of social science periodicals, and more than 150 films were banned or shut down. In addition, the government also announced it had seized 32 million contraband books and 2.4 million video and audio cassettes. Access to media and internet resources on the subject are still restricted or blocked by censors to this day.